Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking time out to join our ePermits webinar this afternoon. The topic of the webinar this afternoon is about implementing ePermits by core modules. We ran a fairly similar type webinar back in December, where we had the concepts, but now we're actually in a position where we can implement this, and I'll be taking you through the concepts of how it can be done and what functionality is available in the different modules, so you can build a permit system to actually meet your unique requirements rather than having to take a whole system. So the topic, as I say, is ePermits. It's implementing ePermits by core modules. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask during the webinar, there is a questions tab on your little dashboard for the GoToMeeting or the GoToWebinar session. By all means, type those in, and my colleague Neil will hold on to the questions and then prompt me during the session as to any questions that need to be asked. But please do ask them as we go, and if I can, I'll answer them as we go as well. Okay, so let's get started. We're looking at why modularize ePermits. This has really been driven by our customer base. Existing clients and new prospects are looking at rolling out systems on a large-scale basis. Particularly the global clients have said that there are some regions in the world where they'd like to put the system, where they don't have all the information, or the health and safety culture is not really in place for a full-blown compliance-based system. Therefore, they'd like to implement the system in stages and only bring these compliance areas on stream when they've got the data and the appropriate culture is actually in place. Some companies, particularly prospects, have indicated to us that they already have some extensive manual systems in place for checking compliance, and they've expressed a concern that changing the whole permit process could give some change management issues. They see the benefit of all the compliance modules, but they'd like to implement just in stages and gradually supersede the existing systems when it's the right time to do so. So that's really what's driven us to this concept. So the system can actually be modularized now as part of the development we've done, getting ready for the launch of our new ePermits platform. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. There are 4 key modules in the base system, and these are the permit workflow management module, what we call a contractor compliance module, which looks at contractor companies, a worker compliance module, and that looks at not just the workers for the contractors, but any of your own workers that may be getting involved in the permit process for implementing things such as isolations and so forth. And the 4th module is RAMS compliance. They're not ranked in any particular order there. They're not even in alphabetical order on the slide. But the core module is the permit workflow module. And this is then deployed without any of the compliance checking on the others. As time goes by, you can add the other modules to the system to build up the level of coverage for your ePermit system. So permit workflow in its basic format has a number of capabilities. The principal one is that we have some template data sets for buildings. So we have templates for offices, data centers, warehouses, a whole range of different types of buildings. So we can very quickly implement them and then just adjust those templates to meet your actual requirements in terms of locations of services, so where air conditioning is located, where your switch rooms are located, and so forth. Contractors can go through a process of raising a permit request. It could be contractors, but it could be your own team that actually raises permit requests on behalf of contractors. That's entirely up to you and how you currently go through your process. But a lot of people are trying to push back the responsibility of requesting permits back onto the contractors because they know who they're going to send on the job, and they also know the time frames that they'd be looking to do the work, so it fits into their schedules. So contractors can raise permit requests within the system. The client or the FM, if there's an FM company involved, have got the ability to approve access permits, and then specialist people within those organisations, APs or authorised persons, are able to go through the process of approving any high-risk permits, and that could be anything from working at height through to electrical work, hot works, or even to asbestos permit approvals. They're able to print permits, issue permits, and ultimately, obviously, close the permit process. The system itself will store documents, any documents that you want to append to a permit, and the system also stores an audit trail on who did what and when, so that should there be any issues, it can be shown who's been involved in that whole process. And also there's a reporting system within there to actually be able to show you different types of reports, such as how many hot works permits were done in the last 2 weeks in this particular building, or show me all the permits appended into a particular contractor on a particular site. So dice and slice the information how you want to. So the permit workflow module effectively replaces paper permits with a digitized permit that looks and feels the same. So we would replicate your existing permit templates in the system so that the end result is exactly the same as everybody's used to seeing at the moment. So permit workflow, I'll take you just through the stages of permit workflow, and I'll show you some aspects of how this is done within the ePermit system. There are 5 stages. First one is obviously a permit request submitted by a contractor, or as I said earlier on, you could actually make those permit requests yourself. The second stage is that permit request is routed to the correct people within your organization for approval. So that could be hot works going to maybe 3 different people. It might be required to be signed off by the site manager, someone with a technical responsibility, and also someone in health and safety. A work at height permit, for example, may only need to be routed to someone in health and safety, and an access permit may just be routed to the site manager. So depending on what your process is and who is required to sign permits off, we would replicate that within the system's workflow. The third stage is permit approval. The fourth stage is permit print and issue, and the final stage is obviously permit closure. So permit workflow actually provides the hard ROI for the system. It quantifies time and efficiency savings by eliminating pieces of paper wandering around the organization. Everything is electronically routed to the right people at the right time, and warnings are given if things are not done at the right time by individuals within your organization. So there are constant prompts to make sure that a permit request can be approved in time for the proposed time frame of the job. Permits are requested by contractors online, and they're submitted for approval. And as I said earlier, these are routed to the right people within your organization for the approval of the different types of permits. This is all done electronically in email, and you can click on a link in the email which will take you directly to the permit requests, so it can be reviewed and then approved, or if necessary, rejected. All information required to make informed decisions is available on one screen in ePermits, and once a permit has been approved, contractors are advised back by email of the approval, and the permits can then be either printed off on paper or in electronic format as a PDF document. Permits can then be issued at the appropriate time or place of work, and then obviously closed off at the end by the appropriate technical authority. So the workflow process in stage 1 is that typically you would contact a contractor to conduct some work on your site. They would log into ePermits, and they would request a permit for access and any high-risk permits, depending on the job that is required to be done. Once that's all been completed, in just the same way that you would tend to complete something by hand at the moment, that permit request is then submitted by the contractor electronically, and their job is done. Permit requests are quite simple and straightforward for contractors. Firstly, you need to decide which site are they coming on to work. Excuse me. And you're able to set up which sites contractors can work on. So if you have multiple sites and multiple contractors, you may not have all contractors working on all sites. So you can set that up within the system so that when a contractor logs in, they can only request work on sites that they're authorized to work on. The second step is then 6 stages in filling in a permit request. So obviously a work order number can be input into ePermits, and then they will go through a process of selecting a competent person, someone in their team who is nominated as a competent person and will be the team leader on the day. You can then select one or more other people to actually go into the team. So you have a team then of a competent person plus one or more of the other members of the staff. Should you require a security input for car registration, just get through the front gate. A lot of that is required by people such as data centers. That can be input as well. And then also then they'll put in the start date. So what date am I going to start work? What time will I start work? What's my anticipated finish date and finish time? When we go to the next step of the process, the questions are then basically what, where, why, and how. In the core module, there will be nothing in the RAMs selection. So RAMs are bypassed within the workflow process module if that's the only module that you have. If you do have the RAMs compliance module, this will kick in, and I'll show you how that works later. You can then specify where the work is done. So the system will understand when we build a template of exactly what your building looks like. So a zone could, for example, be a floor. So I know I'm coming into a particular building. I'm going to be working on the first floor, and I can then specify location types. So it might be plant rooms, or I can specify particular locations, and I can select what service I'm going to work on. So I may, for example, be working on the air conditioning heating in the roof upper level for this particular building. The activity is going to be either repair activity, maintenance, whatever the activity specified is. And by having these as pull-down menus, it tends to then give a level of consistency to all the permit requests. The free text box for just filling in what I'm going to be doing in terms of the work that's to be done, and then why is the work going to be done. It could be a building services fault, it could be a routine visit, and I can also then specify any high-risk activities. So here, for example, if just one person was coming along to the site, it would tag it as a lone working opportunity automatically. That wouldn't need to be done. If I was going into an area that had asbestos, the asbestos box would be ticked as well. And there are a whole range of other specialist high-risk permits that are modeled within the permit system. And they all come as part of this permit workflow process. So that's the contractor side. So they're able to just fill those 2 sheets in and then send that off. And what will happen then is that those permits will then go through a workflow process similar to the one that's shown as an example here. So permit requests are received the contract from the contractor. Are there any high-risk permits? No. If it's just an access permit, it'll go to the appropriate person for approval. And if it's approved, it will be notified to the contractor and then emailed. If there are high-risk permits required, it then goes through a different route to a different set of APs for approval. A question is asked about, are there any isolations required? And if they are, that will then be routed to the isolations team. And finally, when everything is brought together, if the high-risk permits have been approved, that will be bundled together with the access permit. And then if all have approved, they will then be notified to the contractor. So stages 2 and 3, so if you are one of the approvers of a permit and you receive an email saying that there is a permit requiring your approval within the system, when you click on that link, this is what you'll be taken to see. So you will be able to see on the system there are clashes. So here, for example, in this permit request, I have a clash in terms of location. So I've got another team of people working on the same piece of equipment. So the request has come in for repair for working on AC heating, and it's in the same location. There are service clashes, which would be actually working on exactly the same piece of equipment, and also there are dependent services clashes. So, for example, I need the water on to do my job, but another job needs the water off. So in this instance, we have a clash of permits, which is only in terms of location. So I've got two different jobs taking place in the same location. I can, from here, actually go and view those permits for that other job, so I can then make an informed decision, either myself or by discussion with my colleagues, as to which permit should take priority, or are we prepared to allow both permits to take place at the same time. There is a status box showing exactly what is going on. So the request is currently awaiting approval. It was submitted by this chap on this date, and these are the people that are going to come and work on the job, and this is the time frame that's been specified for working on that job. There's details about the task, and there can be multiple tasks in a permit, not just one, but in this simple example, it's just one job to be done. We're working in data center and offices in the roof upper level, and this is controlled by a particular company. So control of areas could be yourselves, it could be an FM company, it could be a tenant. So again, this is going to define who's in control of that work. What work is going to be done? We're going to do some maintaining and testing of the air conditioning units and test all the electrical equipment. And I now have the option, do I want to instigate any isolations because of this work that's being done? And you'll also have a number of safety precautions. So on your current permits, you'll have a number of safety precautions that have to be ticked off before the work starts, and this is exactly the same. So you can specify what these safety precautions are, and these will appear on the permit, as you'll see in a little while. So that's what you get presented with as a view for approval process, and you're now who's allowed to approve what. So within your organization, this is a chap called Mark Capaldi who works for you. He is actually allowed to authorize access, work at height, and access what we call access all areas. So you specify each individual within your organization as to who has what level of approval or not. So if a work at height permit comes through, Mark will be notified that a permit requires his attention. If a mechanical permit comes through, it won't be routed to him. That'll be routed to other people with those levels of approval. There are two other things that we can also work on. We can provide business risk and security risk as ticks. So you may require someone in the organization who may not be technically involved with the work that's being done, but may need to sign it off from a business perspective, i.e. the work has a potential business impact. When we come to the next stage, which is stage 4, here we're talking about a notification to the contractor to either print or collect a permit on arrival. And when a permit is printed, this is just on our standard template as an example, but this could be exactly the same as your own permit templates. The relevant information is populated from the permit system. So it gives you the permit number and any associated permits. So there are 3 permits associated with this. Who's coming on site, what time they're planning to do the work, what's going to be done, exactly what we saw on the permit request that you approved. But in this instance, it's just showing you the information on a paper version of the permit, or in this instance, a PDF version of the permit. So the permits can be printed and issued. Issue is down to the way that you do your own issuing process. You could ask the contractor to print the permits and bring them with them on site and present them when they arrive. Or the permit bundles can be down at the front desk. So when a contractor arrives, they give their name and permit number. If it's on the list of planned jobs for the day, they're allowed on site. If it's not, they're not. And then they're issued with those permits at that point. Things such as electrical work or even things like hot works, issue of that permit may well be at the point of work. So they'll be escorted by an AP to that point of work. The inspection, the checklist will be done. The safety precaution checklist, as you can see the start of at the bottom, will be gone through and ticked off. And when it's all been completed to everybody's satisfaction, then that permit will be issued. Once the job's been completed, you go through a permit closure process. So here, the AP is presented with a short audit tool, which just basically enables them to fill in some questions that are defined again by yourselves so that you can go through a closeout process. So was the work done properly? Was it done safely? If it wasn't done safely, for example, you can then open up some other questions underneath, which allows you then to start building up a detailed piece of information about problems that were on that particular job. There's a free text field for putting in information about that job or the reasons why you're not happy. And you can also upload things like photographs so it becomes part of the permit. So you're actually able to start building up, if you like, areas of non-compliance within permits. But if everything's okay, you have the ability then to just close a permit off and it's then archived, and through the reporting system you can then access any previous permits and they're all archived for whatever statutory requirements they're necessary, or your own if they're longer. So ePermit workflow module, that's just a very brief overview of that. It gives you a comprehensive method of managing the request, approval, print, issue and closure process for permits. It's all electronic, it's all automated, things are routed around the organization, and nothing can move ahead until steps are done. So you cannot have a contractor turn up if the permits have not yet been approved. If they do turn up, you can send them home. It smooths the process and enables you to retain whatever current method of compliance checking you do. By compliance checking, I mean RAMs, checking training and competencies, and so forth. The compliance modules can be enabled now at a later date, individually or all at once. So this ends up giving you a cost-effective and an easily manageable process for putting ePermits in place. So what are the compliance modules? There are 3 compliance modules: RAMS compliance, contractor compliance, and worker compliance. The RAMS compliance modules go through an approval process. So as a contractor, I'd have to submit my RAMS to you, and I can now do this through the ePermit system with this compliance module. Once they're submitted, they can then go around the organization to the correct people that have the ability to approve RAMS, and then they are stored within the system, and then they can be selected for any particular job to which they're pertinent. So RAMs submitted through there, the workflows, RAMs have a validity period as well. So once they're approved, they can't be reused if they've gone past the expiry date. So the user are prompted to resubmit RAMs again through the approval process. Out-of-date RAMs can't be applied, and they're only applied to pertinent work. So RAMs in ePermits are location and service specific in the database. So they can only be selected for the work in the appropriate location. So I can't, for example, pick a generic RAM to do a particular high-risk piece of work. The workflow process with RAMs is this part here. So firstly, the contractor is contacted to work on site. Do RAMs exist for the job? If they do, then they go through the permit process. If they don't, they're prompted to create the RAMs. They come to you for approval, and only when they're approved can it go back into the system and they can create the request. So the RAMs compliance module will stop contractors putting a request in for a piece of work unless RAMs have been submitted for that work. In terms of submitting RAMs, contractors fill in very basic information about the RAMs. They can update documents, so this is where they'd actually put the PDF version of their own RAMs, but here we're specifying what services they apply to and what site they apply to as well. And also in the administration, this chap internally within our company, Ben Cummins, is allowed to authorize RAMs. So when RAMs come in, this chap Ben will be alerted and he can go through the process of approval. This is all part of that RAMs process. When we're in the permit process, you can now see that what will happen is within the request for approval that comes through for this same piece of work, there is now how the work's going to be done, and a click on the view button will actually allow the approver to just review the RAMs prior to approving the work. In just the permit workflow module, you don't have that capability. And so you have to be sure that those RAMs are in place at that point in time. The next module is what we call contractor compliance, and this now looks at the contractor companies and assesses whether they're an approved vendor or they're allowed to work on particular sites. It checks their insurances and also checks if they're an asbestos qualified contractor, should there be any asbestos work that's taking place. So it cross-checks all of this data during the permit request process. So insurances, eligibility to work, and so forth are all checked. They're all recorded and measured and uploaded within the system. Permits cannot be requested if hard compliance measures are not met. So if, for example, I'm coming in to do some work and I'm going to take a wall down, there's asbestos there. If I'm not an asbestos qualified contractor, I cannot even put that request in. Permit requests can be made and warnings shown for some measures. So, for example, if my insurances are not adequate for a particular piece of work, it doesn't stop me submitting the request, but what it does, it makes sure that before I can actually start work, I have to bring along evidence to show that my insurances are now up to date. The system will also now start to help build up what we call a non-compliance matrix, where we saw us do the closeout review on the work. When you start filling in those boxes in the audit at the end, it'll now start to build up a non-compliance matrix that you can use for contractor reviews at the end of the year. So with contractor compliance, we're sitting in here. We've been through the RAMS compliance. Are the company details okay? Yes. So we can move on from there. If they're not, they go back through the loop, and they have to keep going back through the loop until they are okay, or we cannot submit a permit request. So core contractor data, there's information obviously about name, address, and details, telephone numbers, and so forth. Is this a current contractor? So if I'm not happy with a contractor, I can make them temporarily temporarily non-users in the system, so they can't put permit requests in until such time as I've authorized them to do it again. There are information on the insurances, so contractors will fill in information about their different insurances, and they can upload a file or upload a certificate to actually show and prove that that is the case. With the expiry date, they're also then prompted when they get close to this date to make sure that a latest version has been updated. And same with asbestos certificates. If asbestos certificate is required, and if they have a current license, they can upload the license so it can again be checked within the system. This is that non-compliance matrix I was talking to you about. So as you go through that closure process, you start to build up any non-compliances within the system, and you're able then to generate reports against individual contractors as to any errors and problems that you've had with them in the past that you can then use in your annual review process with them. The final area is what we call worker compliance. So here we're looking at things such as induction videos and tests, and most importantly, the training and competency checking of those people. So ePermits in the worker compliance module will now hold information such as eligibility to work in a country, security checks, and so forth. It'll also hold training, competency, and induction details for everybody as well. All the records consist of a data validity and a validity period, and as such, the users and the contractors are prompted at any time things are due to expire. You can also upload training certificates as evidence within the system as well. A training is an example of a hard block. So if I am coming to do some work at height and my work at height training expired a month ago, I cannot submit that permit request because the individual on that permit does not meet the training and competency requirements. Very importantly, particularly with GDPR coming through, no personal information other than that required for a permit is held. So typically it's contact number, name, and so forth, and obviously evidence of the certificates in terms of a date that it was passed, a validity date, and a copy of that certificate that's been uploaded. But no other personal information is held. So now, with regard to the worker compliance, we're now in a position that if we've met all the RAMS compliance and we've met the company compliance details, training and competency checks are done, and you're now able to submit a compliant permit. And that gives the benefit to you at your end, knowing that all the checks and balances have been done prior to a permit request being submitted. It looks like it's a flow here with RAMS first, company details and training and competency, but it doesn't matter which sequence. If you wanted to implement other modules, if you only wanted to implement, for example, the company details, the RAMS are switched off so that the contractor goes straight through this loop to the company details, and then the training and competency is switched off as well. So you can still go through the process, but the emphasis is on you to make sure that you check the RAMS through your current process and you check the training and competencies through your current process as well. So in terms of information, here we have information about an individual. Within the system, we're holding information about them, such as when were they born after a particular date. So the actual date of birth not in there. But this is just tracking whether they are over 18 or not. Mobile number, which can then appear on the permit, and things such as eligibility to work in the United Kingdom and so forth. In terms of the training and competencies, we have a number of competency areas: passport schemes, apprentice, first aider, national security, qualified electrician, and so forth. These boxes are then tagged by the contractor, and documents can be uploaded to support that information. Anywhere where there isn't an uploaded document, a blue circle and an arrow appears showing that information needs to be uploaded. And you can run exception reports to find out where you have gaps in the system or where any of your contractors may have gaps in the system. In terms of inductions, this particular chap, Frederick, is only inducted on 2 of the 6 sites that this company is allowed to work on, and there are the induction certificates if you have such a thing. If he comes to work on site called Canary Wharf, it won't stop a permit request coming through, but it will be flagged up on the permit request that this chap Frederick needs to complete his induction before he starts work. We do have an electronic version of this, so within ePermits you can review your health and safety information or do an induction video or health and safety checks, and that will have maybe 50 questions embedded behind it. And the system will randomly pick 10, and this person has to score 9 out of 10 to be inducted or to pass the health and safety, whatever your requirements are. So again, this can be done electronically prior to actually turning up on site. And finally, there are other areas. There's work at height. So here, anything these days over 1 inch is deemed working at height. There are different types of working at height: ladders, open edges, scaffold towers, mutes, and so forth. This person has only got general training in working at height. So if I was getting into work on towers and scaffolds, again, the permit request would not be able to be submitted because he doesn't have the appropriate training for that equipment. Similarly with high voltage, again, where has this person been approved? And that can be site specific as well. Again, this shows that this site is allowed to work on high voltage data centers and offices, but the certificate has not yet been uploaded. So all of these checks and balances are done. And also finally with asbestos, so ePermits will cover the whole range of asbestos training requirements on the system. And again, with certificates uploaded. So if you go through a process, and I mentioned about the system trapping these permit requests, if you go through the process of putting together a permit request and it's non-compliant, these are the types of flags that will appear to me, the contractor, as I'm filling in my permit request. So I've got, for example, here a green warning. This says that this chap's site induction has expired. That green warning on its own would not be enough to stop the permit request being submitted to you. But what it will do is it will indicate on that permit request that this chap, Richard De Silva, has to be inducted before work starts. And as I said earlier, I could do that electronically prior to coming to your site. I also have amber warnings on the screen. Here, for example, in the system we've put in that we require a minimum of 3 days from a permit request to the start of the time of work. That's to give us time to go through the process of checking everything, approving everything, and making sure everything is set up so that that work can be done. Amber warnings are, again, they're not hard drops. This amber warning purely says that there's insufficient lead time of 3 days, and it can be set to whatever period you want, for this permit request. It will not stop the permit request coming through, but it will flag up to you that the permit request is within the lead time that we've specified, and therefore it may get rejected. And it says here to the contractor, your request may not get approval. However, the red ones, these are hard drops. So this is saying that I must have at least 2 persons trained in working at in hot works, because what I'm actually doing, I'm doing some welding. So I require a hot works permit, and only one of my people, if not both, are not trained in hot works. And everybody in the team has to be trained at working at height. So for this job, there is a problem somewhere in that either one or both of these people do not have the right training requirements. So as a contractor, I'd have to go back to the previous screens and change my team until I get rid of the red ones. At that point, I'll then be able to submit a permit request. So this is showing you how these compliance modules are really doing those checks and balances to make sure you're totally compliant before work starts on any project. So that's in essence the system. So we have, as I say, the permit workflow module in the middle, which does a whole range of different tasks, and in essence replaces paper, gives you a digitized version of paper. We've got the RAMS compliance module, contractor compliance module, and worker compliance modules as well. What are we doing in the future? As I said to you at the beginning, we are going through a process of replatforming and putting it into another version, another environment for ePermits. And that's going to give us an opportunity now to start adding a whole range of different types of tools. We're going to be adding things like an audit tool that will enable you to do, for example, dynamic risk assessments. So once I've arrived at my location of work, I need to do a dynamic risk assessment before I start work. The audit tool, which will be enabled on a mobile app, will enable me to fill that in automatically and append that to the permit bundle itself, so that record is all in place. A whole range of other things for PPE and equipment. Have I brought the right PPE? Have I got the right equipment to do the work? COSH, and also a lone working app, where we're looking at providing a mobile application that a mobile device with the contractor will buzz at a particular time, every half an hour or every hour, and I have to make a positive action, i.e. press a button that says, yes, I'm okay. If I press the button, the system detects it and everything just carries on as normal. Reporting is by exception, so if I don't press that button, I'm warned again, and if I don't press it that time, then an email alert will be sent to the appropriate AP to go and investigate that there may be a problem with this lone worker. And we're moving on even further into the future. What I've just showed you there is what we're aiming to do probably within the next 12 months. But in future, ePermits is, as we show here, sitting there, accessing databases on buildings and people, and able to produce various reports on those type of things. What we're planning to do, though, is build a whole suite of different parts of what we call a safety management solution. So ePermits will just be one part of that in an ecosystem. So we're looking at incident management, corrective actions, preventative actions, and risk analysis as well. And obviously the audit tool that I mentioned to you sits in the middle of all these and therefore gets information fed into and passed on to different parts of the system. So for example, if I have an incident, what's that going to mean in terms of my activities? Lessons learned may feed into the corrective actions and preventative actions. That will lead to a change in a risk assessment. That change in a risk assessment will be again then fed into the ePermit system. All of these are going to be mobile enabled, so currently everything can be done on a tablet, but we're going to be moving everything into a smartphone environment where you can have your device in your pocket and, as I say, complete risk assessments or report incidents, do audits, close off permits and so forth, all with a mobile application. And that will then enable us to do a whole range of different things, keep feeding information in, building the sizes of those databases and information, and that then means you can report on even more activity and dissect any incidents and problems within your business in even more detail. And ultimately, that will then be led to feed into your own data warehouse, so the information can be passed from the safety management system into your own data system, so you provide reports at whatever level you need within your organization. So that's the future. I mean, that's where we hope to be in, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 years' time, is having a complete safety management solution that's basically built itself up from the ePermits environment, where we have got a lot of the compliance checks and capabilities already in place and as a system. So that basically concludes now the webinar. I hope that you found it of interest. My information or my contact details are on the screen in front of you. If you have any questions that come up later on, please do pop them on an email, send them across to me, and I'll be able to come back to you quickly with any answers. And if you're interested to look at the system in more detail, particularly in terms of how modules may fit the requirements that you have, again, contact me and we can set up an on-site discussion and an actual demonstration of the system. So unless there are any burning questions that have been typed into the system, I can't see any within the system. No, I can't see anything that has come up. I want to thank you all very much indeed again for giving the time to attend the webinar. I hope you found it interesting, and I look forward to maybe being in touch with you in the near future. Thank you very much indeed.